Hello, Nigerians, and welcome to another edition of Politics is Life. My name is Yetunde Makinde. Today on the program, what I'll be doing is discuss the content of my book titled Who Can or Will Save Nigeria? Entire Brigade of Technocrats. So those who are familiar with the channel or who may have seen my introductory video, you know that this channel was set up primarily to help me, to set up primarily to help me promote my book and to also share information, useful information. So so today's program, like I said, is dedicated to discussing the content to help my viewers, potential buyers, to help my viewers, audience, and potential buyers decide whether my book is worth their time and money. So without further ado, I'll just get started. So chapter 1 is broken into 3 parts. Part 1 is, that's 1.1, is Once Upon a Time. 1.2 is Man a Political Animal. I actually have a content in the playlist that has the same title, Man a Political Animal. And then 1.3 is Who Speaks for the Proletariat. What I did with, what I discussed in Once Upon a Time is basically the events as they unfolded prior to independence, from the days of Nigeria's foremost nationalist figure, that's Abba Macaulay. The events that unfolded not just in Nigeria but across the African continent. I just did this in brief, just picked interesting things from here and there, pull them all together to make that initial argument for where I was going to take the book. So that's what 1.1 is about, which is Once Upon a Time, the events as they unfolded, and as they unfolded up to when the first coup happened. And as far as I know, that first coup in 1966 was what killed the soul of this nation. It dealt a terrible blow to the country, to the nascent country, a fledgling nation. And nothing has been the same since that first coup, which should have never happened. The military should have never pushed its way into public governance like it did. And this is something, I would also like to share that prior to when I started to write my book or even collect data for it or anything of the sort, I always wondered at the back of my mind why, and this is many years ago, some more than 10 years ago, I would just, randomly wonder why coups happened across the African continent the way it did, I never imagined there were, my naive mind thought there were isolated incidents. I never knew or even considered that the coups across Africa were orchestrated by the usual suspect. So it was until I started to, of course, in the course of writing my book, I had to go through I had to read up a lot of things, sometimes to verify my thoughts, to verify that what I'm even saying, whether my arguments and the things I was putting down were even fit into anything at all. So in the course of collating data, I found a trend, in relation to the coups across Africa. And like I said, it could be traced back to the usual suspects. Like for example, I always knew that Lumumba Patrice, for example, was assassinated by the CIA, even though I never really knew why. But I remember seeing that documentary on National Geographic many years ago, maybe some 20 years plus, yeah. but I never really dug into why it was assassinated. I mean, I was much younger, and the politics was not the core of my interest at that time. So, um, by the time what I'm saying is, by the time I was done writing my book, it became clear to me that the coups in Africa were orchestrated by the usual suspect, and for the same reason as why the African continent was even invaded in the first place. But I don't have to go into all that before people start. There are people who, when you say these things, I mean, Africans, not foreigners, when you put forth this argument, who want to shut you down and tell you that you're playing the victim card. You have to read my book to understand that I'm not blaming anyone for the woes of Africa. What I actually want us to do is pick ourselves up by the bootstrap and do what only we can do for ourselves, which is to save ourselves. No one is going to help us. Nobody is going to come and take us out of the miry pit that we found ourselves. We're the only ones who can do that for ourselves. That's the core of my message for Nigeria, and by extension, countries across the African continent. At any rate, to actually buttress the argument that the different military coups at different times across the African continent were orchestrated by the usual suspect. Let me just give this to you. I never knew. I've never read this anywhere. I've never read it anywhere. I'm sure it's not in any history book that I read in schools anywhere on the continent. But if you dig, when you research, you come by information that you would not ordinarily just find even on the internet. So I found that it was the CIA that gave Mandela's location away to the apartheid South African government, and that's how he was picked up. The CIA gave the South African government the location of Mandela, and that's how he was picked up. So now let me just move on. So that's that. Okay. Man a Political Animal is 1.2. I think I was already going off on a tangent. So let me try to stay on focus. Okay, so 1.2 is Man a Political Animal. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, that I've got a content with the same caption, with the same title, Man a Political Animal. So you may want to see that to have an idea of what 1.2, what I discussed there. Then Who Speaks for the Proletariat? I more or less asked the simple question of who speaks for those who don't have a voice in Nigeria, the voiceless, the underprivileged, the poor, the working poor, people who just don't have a voice. Who speaks up for them in this country? The upper class doesn't do that because many of those who fall in the upper class are selfish, and I think the few that are enlightened among the upper class need to begin to look at themselves. It's another core message of my book. Those among the upper class who are enlightened need to look at themselves, put their heads together, and do what is right by this country. It's actually their effort, the effort of the enlightened elitist class that can salvage Nigeria as it is now, in my opinion. So who speaks for the proletariat? Who speaks for them? Who speaks for the poor? So let me just move on to chapter 2. In chapter 2, I discussed the economic state of the nation. I also discussed whether oil is a curse or a blessing. I'm sure we've all heard that discussion around the curse of the oil curse. We've all, I'm sure, at different times have a discussion around it, asking whether it's a curse or a blessing. Some still believe it's a curse. You can read my opinion, what I think. What I discussed in 2.2 is whether it's truly a curse or a blessing. I shouldn't give that away. You get a copy of the book and see what I think. So the economic state of the nation is 2.1. In that particular section, what I did was to do a breakdown of the economic situation of the country using using indices like GDP and contrasting it with human development indices. You know, things like HDI covers things like life expectancy, quality of life, access to education, all of those kind of things. So in discussing the state of the economy, the state of the nation, I was using this different. I was using this varied metrics because if you used GDP, which is what pundits like to do, use the GDP, and when you listen to pundit, they'll tell you Nigeria is doing fantastic. Now look at the GDP. Nigeria has the largest GDP in sub-Saharan Africa. She's doing just great. That's what you would hear pundits say all the time. But how can a country be doing great when our inhabitants, citizens and residents live in penury? When people can't feed? When people have no electricity? People don't have potable water? People don't have access to good roads? People don't have access to education? People can't even feed. And then you're telling us Nigeria is doing just fine, that Nigeria is actually the greatest. So in 2.3, I've looked at two parts, 2.1, 2.2. So now 2.3, 2.3 says Human Development Index as a measure of economic development. So I looked at the Human Development Indices extensively. I used a lot of empirical statistics to also buttress and argue my point. In 2.4, 2.4 as the caption, poverty is expensive. I'm sure we all agree, you know, that poverty is expensive. It's actually cheaper to, in the long term, to wipe or eradicate or eliminate poverty in a society than to allow it become endemic, like it's becoming in Nigeria, because of the associated negative impact of poverty on a society. That's why poverty is expensive. That's the crux of that discussion. Then 2.5 is captioned Education, the Tool of Liberation. In that, at the end of that chapter, that's chapter 2, I also put a list of my favorite quotes on education. I'm sure you've got yours too. I'm sure you've got quotes that you like on diverse subject. So if you're like me who like to read, I always have loved reading. So it's not a surprise that I ended up writing my own book, or that I've ended up on a writing career path later in life. So, so yes, like I'm saying, I closed out chapter 2 with my favorite quotes on education. So now let's move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is also broken down into 5 parts. 3.1, a nation of consumers. 3.1 is titled or is captioned, a nation of consumers. What I did there is to show that we are rabid consumer of, we love foreign items. Some of us even like to brag about our foreign consumptions, but the reason we do this is because we do not understand the impact of these actions, constantly consuming import while we export nothing. We export nothing. There are those who argue that we export music, entertainment, which is true, but you can't build national wealth on the exportation of entertainment. It's only the exportation of technological innovation that can give you the kind of wealth that can go around, that can increase the standard of living of large swathes of a country's population. It's only innovation, technological innovation, that can lead to, you can export technology, yes, and then your technological innovation can also then cause and bring about production, local production, So a nation of consumers, that's what I discussed there in 3.1. In 3.2, I asked the question, to what extent are we innovative? I won't say much of that, because I think a lot of us, we see ourselves in some of the examples that I highlighted in my, because I have tables like this in my book. Tables like this, where what I do is paint a scenario, paint a scenario, or where sometimes I paint a scenario, sometimes I use it to explain, I use the box. I have like 15 boxes. Sometimes I use the box to paint a scenario, sometimes I use it to say things that I didn't say in the body of, I didn't say in the chapter, but I still want to discuss somewhat, so I just put it in a box. So I painted the scenarios, I lighted the scenarios in a box in chapter 3. A lot of us will find one or two of the scenarios familiar. So that's all I'll say about to what extent are we innovative. So now in 3.21, I argued that STEM is the future. STEM is the acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I argue that these subjects are the future, and that's the fact, not entertainment. Entertainment can only add to what STEM, you can only build national wealth on a STEM foundation. You have a solid technological foundation. That's a society where the mind of the residents, inhabitants, and the citizens are sharp. They are forward thinking, they're futuristic, they're problem solvers. When they come by a challenge, rather than become demoralized or think we can't get out of this, They're instantaneously thinking, how do we solve this? How do we move ahead? That's how the mind of problem solvers work. You know, when you're hit with a challenge, you don't go like, gosh, here's the end of the road. No. What should come to your mind is, how do I get past this? How do I get past this without breaking anything first? Sometimes you need to break things to get ahead. Yeah, but your original thought, for me, I'm speaking personally now. My thought when I'm faced with challenges in my personal life, okay. I don't know. That sounds totally mad. Okay. So when I'm faced with challenges in my personal life, and believe you me when I say that life has thrown me some mad hard curves, it's thrown me curveballs many times. But I found, and that's how I knew, I haven't always known this. But as I got older and I began to do an assessment of my life, of things I've been through, I would just I reached the point where I realized that at every point where I've been met with a challenge, my immediate thought is always, how do you get out of this place without causing more damage, without breaking anything? Do I scale the fence? Do I go quietly below the fence? Do I abandon this path altogether? Your mind should be trying to work out a solution, not become demoralized or give up. But because Africans have been conditioned, we've been so beat down now for millennia, we give up easily when we're faced with challenges, and that kills innovation because it means the mind isn't functioning like it should. So we're not as innovative as we should be. It's part of the reason why we suffer in Nigeria and by extension on the African continent. Now I'm going to put a stop to this because I've been talking for about 20 minutes and I try to not make this so long so that it doesn't become boring. So see you in the next clip.